Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure and an honor to be here with you, speaking on a topic that one would not normally find a person speaking on debt or tax or illicit financial flows to be having a conversation when it comes to food, over-regulation, and unilateral coercive measures. In Somalia, there is a proverb, and it says, if you throw a stone in the market, you might hit your neighbor. So we're going to talk money, and that's why this is my conversation. Where are these stones landing? Why are they landing there? Do we really need these stones to be thrown out into the marketplace? And the reason I say that is because food is business, and food is big business. There are probably 5 or more big companies in the world that manage most of the cross-border food movements across different spaces. And if I look specifically at the African continent, 90% of its carbohydrate sources come from off the continent. And these are necessities for that particular region. So how does one go into this conversation speaking about when the world is in economic crisis? And now you see the added layer of unilateral coercive measures coming in with the debt crisis, with the debates on increasing of taxation, not only with the UN tax conversations at the General Assembly, but also with the International Maritime Organization that is adding maritime taxes. And as I pointed out, if you are importing goods that are food products into your continents, then these prices are going to go up very soon. And at the same time, in a market where we have reducing overseas development aid. This increased regulation is spreading beyond not only treaties and laws at the global level and regional levels, but is also trickling down into guidelines and recommendations. And really, this is where the biggest impact on finance is showing itself. While you have sanctions at the Security Council level, what you have is a series of unilateral measures that are being rolled out from different parts of the world, including regional blocs, where these economic blocs are making decisions to close down on the ability of many countries, some of which are extremely fragile and low-income countries, to actually receive food products because they are unable to make financial transactions and to complete those processes. So these layers of finance that are affecting domestic needs are also adding to limitations not only on the right to food, but also other human rights, including the right to survive. So when one reflects on the impact of unilateral coercive measures and overcompliance on the key aspects of right to food, issues of availability, accessibility, adequacy, and sustainability have already been highlighted by Madame Duhan. But there are also certain issues that circulate around finance, and there are 4 key issues I would like to point to. The first one is that during the FFD negotiations in Seville in June this year, we saw positive steps towards the creation of a debtors club, as well as conversations around the setting up of a task force to take the financing conversations forward. However, more needs to be done in legal regulation of finance using the lens of human well-being, to be truly assessed to ensure that any unilateral actions, which of course fall outside international law, do not undermine human life and survival. And what we do see is that diverse stakeholders, whether they're corporations or individuals, are now more and more finding themselves obliged to implement unilateral measures or face consequences in the country issuing this measure should they fail to comply. Blocking of their businesses, drops in profitability, and then also firings of labor staff. And access to goods and services is then also reduced. So when this affects the value chain of food, what one starts to see, and I say this now very often, that there is blood on the budget lines. And when these decisions are being made on financial transactions, we see more and more that food is leading to issues around survival. That now takes me to my second point, which is that the reform of the global financial and fiscal systems does need to advance an international law regime that does not condone the use of UCMs to undermine the ability of corporations and individuals to operate truly globally, if that is our intention as an international community. The laws must be anchored in not only mutual beneficial practices of international cooperation and assistance, but must align with the international human rights framework, standards and norms that will oblige states to take necessary measures of survival. The third point, which is in line of letters, both letters that I have led to the US government, to the New York State Senate, BlackRock on Zambia, and the IMF on various technical issues, including surcharges, show clearly that regulation, for example, by the Israeli government most recently, that taxation being withheld, debt being blocked, or any type of financial transactions are being used to hinder the ability to actually fund not only policies and services that are essential, but also disproportionately does affect the poorest. We already are in a case where we see clear famine in both Palestine and the Sudan. My third point is my report that I presented to the General Assembly last year on a global fiscal architecture. This is an extremely important issue because we need to ensure that all member states on an equal footing are exploring effective and fair mechanisms to use public resources to grant human rights for all by tackling uncontrolled growth of the wealth of a few. Inequality as is at its highest ever point currently. Governments cannot tackle these issues alone and therefore require meaningful participation, cooperation, and assistance to address the issues of global tax abuse, all of which are principles of human rights, under a multilateral and inclusive rights-aligned fiscal framework. My report goes forward, and the IMF, under the Pact of the Future, was also tasked to reform the international financial architecture, and it is important that member states continue to push for this report to be released. I would like to point out that my upcoming report to the UNGA next month looks at issues of financing peace. And I think that as we talk about issues of food, one must take into consideration the fact that whereas we normally talk about economies that are socialist or capitalist, we are now in an era where we are speaking about war economies and peacetime economies. And for this, we really need to sit back and reflect. I thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the conversation, Madam Chair.